My family made me their income source from the moment I turned 5. I mean that literally. My first pageant was the Little Miss Sunflower Festival in Kansas, and I remember Mom's hands pulling my hair so tight my scalp burned. She painted my face with makeup that smelled like chemicals and made my eyes water. Dad adjusted the camera angle while my older brother Adrian watched from the doorway, eating a popsicle. He was 7. He got to be 7. I got a crown that cut into my forehead and a talent portion where I had to tap dance to a song I didn't know the words to. We drove 4 hours each way. Mom packed my costume changes in the trunk with military precision. 6 outfits, each one more expensive than our monthly grocery bill. Dad had quit his job 2 months earlier to manage my career full-time. That's what he called it, my career. At 5 years old, I won 3rd place, which meant $500 and a cheap trophy. Mom cried with relief in the parking lot. Dad immediately registered me for 3 more competitions that month. Adrian asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. Dad said we couldn't afford it. The irony didn't register until years later. I was standing on stages in $1,000 dresses while my brother ate generic cereal for every meal. The pageant circuit became our entire existence. Every weekend was a different city, different stage, different set of judges who evaluated children like livestock. Mom would time my smiles, make me practice my wave until my arm ached. Elbow up, wrist loose, fingers together. The Vaseline on teeth trick to keep smiling even when your face wanted to stop. Dad networked with other pageant parents, trading tips on photographers and spray tan brands that didn't streak on young skin. By age 7, I was competing nationally. The prizes got bigger, and so did the expenses. Custom gowns from designers who specialized in children's formal wear, professional hair and makeup artists who traveled with us, coaching sessions that cost more per hour than Mom used to make in a day at her old job. Dad took out a credit card to cover the costs, then another, then a third. The logic was simple. Invest money to make money. I was the product, the investment, the family's lottery ticket. Adrian started staying home with our grandmother while we traveled. Mom said it was better that way, that he'd be a distraction. Really, they couldn't afford to feed an extra person on the road. Gran lived in a studio apartment and survived on Social Security. She fed Adrian pasta and canned soup while we stayed in hotel rooms near competition venues. I asked about him once during a car ride to Oklahoma. Mom snapped that I needed to focus on my routine instead of worrying about my brother. Focus became the word they used most. Focus on your posture. Focus on your smile. Focus on winning because we couldn't afford for me to lose. The credit card debt was growing faster than my earnings. Dad started booking me for local modeling gigs between pageants. Print ads for department stores, catalog shoots for children's clothing brands. The pay was less prestigious than pageants, but more reliable. I spent a Saturday afternoon pretending to enjoy a breakfast cereal I wasn't allowed to actually eat. Sugar interfered with maintaining competition weight. Mom had me on a diet by age 8. Lean protein, vegetables, carefully measured portions. I watched other kids at school eat birthday cake and pizza while I had carrot sticks and grilled chicken. The nutritionist Mom hired cost $200 per session. She created meal plans designed to keep me thin but energized enough to perform. The math never quite added up in my favor. Dad discovered child acting auditions when I was 9. Hollywood was only 6 hours away, close enough to be feasible. He started driving me to Los Angeles twice a week for auditions. Commercial casting calls, television pilots, bit parts in movies. I'd memorize sides in the car while Dad chain-smoked and talked about our big break. We got close several times. I booked a national commercial for a toy company that paid $15,000. Dad immediately spent it on new headshots, a subscription to casting databases, and an acting coach who promised to get me ready for series regular work. The coach was a former child star herself, now 40 and bitter. She taught me how to cry on command by thinking about sad things. I learned to summon tears by imagining Adrian alone at Gran's apartment, eating his pasta dinner while watching our old TV. It worked every time. The breakthrough came when I was 10. A recurring role on a family sitcom filming in Los Angeles. 3 episodes guaranteed. Possibility of becoming a series regular if the character tested well. The pay was $5,000 per episode. Dad gave his notice at the apartment we'd been renting. We moved to Los Angeles into a cramped 2-bedroom in North Hollywood that cost twice what we'd paid in Kansas. Adrian and Gran came with us. Gran got the couch. Adrian got a sleeping bag in the corner of the living room. I got my own room because I needed privacy to practice my lines and get proper rest before early call times. The show was terrible. A generic family comedy with canned laughter and scripts that felt like they'd been written by adults who'd never met actual children. But it was network television, and I was good at it. Good enough that they kept my character past the initial 3 episodes. By season's end, I was appearing in 12 of 22 episodes. The money felt substantial until it was divided against our expenses. Rent, food, gas for Dad's constant driving, new clothes for auditions, maintenance for my headshots and reels, taxes that took 30% of everything I earned. Mom got a job as a waitress to help cover costs, but she had to quit after 6 weeks when my shooting schedule became unpredictable. Someone needed to be available to drive me to set at 5 in the morning and pick me up 12 hours later. Adrian enrolled in public school and hated it. He'd been a good student in Kansas, but Los Angeles was different. Bigger classes, tougher kids, teachers who didn't have time for students who weren't problems. He started getting in fights. Gran would get called to the school because Mom was with me at auditions and Dad was networking with industry people. Adrian got suspended twice in the first semester. Dad's solution was to ground him from the television, which was ironic since Adrian barely got to watch it anyway. I was on it, and he was stuck doing homework in the corner while the rest of us discussed my performance. The sitcom got canceled after 2 seasons. The ratings had been declining, and the network decided to go in a different creative direction. I cried when I found out, not because I loved the show, but because I knew what it meant. Dad's face went gray when my manager called with the news. We had maybe 3 months of savings if we were careful, less if we weren't. Dad immediately pivoted to film auditions. Movies paid more per project, he reasoned, even if they were less stable than television. I auditioned for everything. Studio films, independent productions, student projects that didn't pay but offered exposure. The rejection rate was brutal. For every callback, there were 50 no's. For every job offer, there were 100 almosts. I was 12 when I booked my first feature film, a supporting role in a thriller about a family hiding a dangerous secret. The part required me to cry in nearly every scene, to look terrified and vulnerable. The director loved my audition, said I had depth beyond my years. What he didn't know was that the depth came from actual fear. Fear that we'd lose our apartment. Fear that Adrian would get expelled. Fear that I'd fail, and my family would blame me. The movie shot for 6 weeks, and I was on set for 4 of them. The days were long, sometimes 16 hours under hot lights with dozens of crew members watching my every movement. Between takes, my mom would run my lines with me. Dad would be on his phone, already researching my next audition. Adrian came to visit the set once. He stood behind the monitors watching me pretend to be someone else, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach hurt. Not jealousy exactly. Something worse. Resignation. Like he'd already accepted that his life would always be secondary to mine. The film premiered 8 months later and bombed at the box office. Critics called it overwrought and predictable. Several reviews mentioned my performance specifically as one of the few bright spots. Dad printed those reviews and kept them in a folder. Proof that I had talent, that we were on the right track. The movie's failure didn't matter in his calculation. What mattered was that casting directors had seen me work, that my reel now included dramatic film work, that I was marketable. At 13, I booked a series regular role on a cable drama. The show was darker than the sitcom, dealing with heavy themes that made me uncomfortable. My character was a teenager dealing with her parents' messy divorce. The scripts were well written, and the cast was talented. The showrunner was known for launching young actors into successful careers. And this was the big break Dad had been chasing since my first pageant. The money was substantial. $20,000 per episode, 20 episodes per season. After taxes and my manager's cut and my agent's percentage, I'd net maybe $250,000 per year. For the first time, we weren't living paycheck to paycheck. Dad leased a nicer apartment in Studio City, 3 bedrooms, so Adrian finally got his own room. Gran got proper furniture instead of the couch. Mom bought groceries without calculating every penny. But success brought new pressures. The show filmed 10 months out of the year. I worked 6 days a week, 12-hour days minimum. On-set tutoring covered my education requirements legally, but barely. 3 hours of instruction per day, squeezed between scenes, taught by teachers who specialized in keeping child actors minimally educated while maximizing their availability to work. I stopped having friends my own age. How could I? I never attended regular school, never had time for normal activities. The other kids on set were competition, not friends. We were all auditioning for the same roles during hiatus, all aware that our careers were built on being slightly better than the person next to us. Adrian started using drugs at 14. Weed at first, then pills he stole from Gran's prescriptions. Mom found his stash hidden in his closet and lost her mind. She screamed at him about throwing away opportunities, about being ungrateful. The irony was thick enough to choke on. What opportunities? While I worked 60-hour weeks, Adrian attended a school where he knew nobody, came home to an empty apartment because our parents were always with me, and watched our family's entire existence revolve around my earning potential. Dad's solution was to enroll Adrian in counseling. 1 session per week, $150 that insurance didn't cover. The therapist suggested family therapy. Dad said we couldn't afford the time away from my schedule. The show was renewed for a 2nd season, then a 3rd. By 15, I'd been working professionally for a decade. I'd earned over $1 million in my lifetime. My family lived comfortably in a nice apartment, drove a decent car, ate well, and I was miserable. The kind of misery that settles into your bones and becomes part of your baseline existence. I couldn't remember what it felt like to wake up without an agenda, to spend a day doing nothing, to be a kid. Mom noticed my declining mood and hired a therapist for me too. Dr. Vivian Reese had an office in Beverly Hills and specialized in young performers. She'd heard everything before. The pressure, the loss of childhood, the resentment. She was kind and understanding and completely ineffective because therapy couldn't change my circumstances. I couldn't quit. Our family's financial stability depended entirely on my income. Dad had never gone back to work. Mom's waitressing job had been temporary. Adrian's counseling, Gran's medical bills, our rent, our food. Everything was paid for by my labor. I was 15 years old, and I was the sole provider for a family of 5. The show's 4th season brought new complications. My character was aging up, which meant more mature storylines. A romantic subplot with another character. Scenes that required physical intimacy that made me deeply uncomfortable. The intimacy coordinator assured me everything was choreographed and professional. That didn't stop me from feeling like my body was being used as a prop. Dad was thrilled with the direction. Romance meant my character was central to the plot. Central meant job security. Job security meant our bills got paid. My comfort was a distant concern. I filmed a kissing scene with my co-star over 17 takes because the director wanted different angles. 17 times I had to pretend to be intimate with someone while 30 crew members watched, and my mother stood 10 feet away checking her phone. Afterward, I locked myself in my trailer and cried until my face was so swollen they had to delay the next scene. The makeup artist spent 40 minutes with ice packs and eye drops trying to reduce the inflammation. Nobody asked if I was okay. They asked if I could be ready to work in 20 minutes. That was the difference. Adrian's drug use escalated. Pills became harder drugs. Gran found needles in his backpack. Mom wanted to send him to rehab, but the good programs cost $30,000 per month. Even with my income, that felt unsustainable, especially since I'd need to keep working to pay for it. Dad researched cheaper options, state-funded programs with waiting lists, and lower success rates. Adrian ended up in an outpatient program that met 3 times per week. He'd attend his sessions, say what the counselors wanted to hear, then come home and use again. His veins started showing track marks. His eyes went hollow. He stopped eating regularly. He was 16 and actively dying while my face appeared on magazine covers. The disconnect was staggering. I sat for interviews where journalists asked about my fashion choices and my favorite hobbies. I couldn't tell them I didn't have hobbies. That fashion was something stylists chose for me. That my actual life was watching my brother destroy himself while I worked 80-hour weeks pretending to be someone else. The show won awards in its 4th season. I was nominated for a Young Artist Award and an Emmy. Dad flew our whole family to the ceremonies. Adrian looked terrible in his borrowed suit, sweating through withdrawal even though he'd promised he was clean. Gran looked exhausted, older than her years. Mom and Dad looked proud. They posed for photos on the red carpet while I smiled the smile I'd been practicing since I was 5. I won the Young Artist Award. My speech thanked my family for their support and sacrifice. The words felt like ash in my mouth. What sacrifice had they made? I was the one who'd given up childhood, education, normalcy, autonomy. They'd given up having to work. The trade didn't feel equitable. Backstage, after the ceremony, a reporter asked about my future plans. I said something about continuing to grow as an artist and taking on challenging roles. What I wanted to say was that I planned to be 16 and maybe go to a real school and have a friend who wasn't paid to be on set with me. The show was canceled after the 5th season. Not because of ratings, but because the network was restructuring their programming. We found out through a trade publication before our producers even called. Dad's face went white as he read the article. 5 seasons, 100 episodes, and now it was just over. The residuals would help, but they wouldn't sustain our lifestyle indefinitely. I needed another job immediately. At 16, I was technically old enough to work more hours legally, which Dad saw as an advantage. We could be more flexible with scheduling. I could audition for adult roles now, not just teen parts. The market was bigger, he insisted. The opportunities were better. I was so tired I could barely stand. A decade of constant work, of early mornings and late nights, of memorizing lines and hitting marks and performing emotions on command. My body ached in places that shouldn't hurt at 16. My mind felt like static, constant noise with no coherence. I told my parents I wanted to take a break. Just a few months to be normal. To enroll in regular school, to make friends, to exist without a camera pointed at my face. Dad looked at me like I'd suggested setting our apartment on fire. A break? We couldn't afford a break. Did I understand how much our monthly expenses were? The rent, the utilities, the groceries, Adrian's outpatient program, Gran's medications, the car payment. It added up to more than $8,000 per month. Where did I think that money came from? I suggested he could get a job. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face flushed red. Dad's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles jumping. After everything they'd sacrificed for my career, after all the driving and the coaching and the support, I had the audacity to suggest he should work. Did I have any idea how much time he'd invested in managing my career? That was his job. I was his job. The fight escalated until I was screaming and crying, and they were screaming back. Adrian watched from his doorway, high as a kite, with something like pity in his eyes. Gran tried to mediate and got told to stay out of it. Eventually, I retreated to my room, exhausted and defeated. I couldn't quit. They'd made sure of that. Our family's entire financial infrastructure was built on my labor. If I stopped working, we'd lose everything. The apartment, the car, Adrian's treatment program, all of it. They'd effectively trapped me in a career I never chose. My agents found me a new series within 6 weeks. Another drama, this one on a streaming platform. The character was older, more complex. The money was better too. $35,000 per episode, 15 episodes per season. After everyone took their cut, I'd net around $400,000 per year. My father negotiated a percentage of my earnings as my manager, 15% off the top before taxes. I didn't even know that was happening until I saw the paperwork. He'd added himself to my team officially, taking a cut alongside my agent and business manager. I was 16 years old, and my father was literally profiting from managing my child labor. The new show was darker than anything I'd done before. My character dealt with addiction, abuse, trauma. The scripts were phenomenal and the cast was talented, but the material was heavy. I'd spend 12 hours a day embodying someone else's pain, then come home and deal with my own. The lines started blurring. Adrian overdosed 3 months into filming the first season. Gran found him unresponsive in his room, needles and pills scattered across his desk. The paramedics brought him back with naloxone, but it was close. Too close. The hospital wanted to keep him for psychiatric evaluation, but that required insurance approval, and our insurance was garbage. They released him after 72 hours with a referral to intensive outpatient treatment that cost significantly more than what he'd been doing. Mom and Dad sat me down the night Adrian came home from the hospital. They needed to talk about finances. Adrian's treatment would cost an additional $2,000 per month. Plus, he'd need residential treatment eventually, which was $40,000 minimum. They'd looked into loans, but our debt-to-income ratio was already precarious. The credit cards from my pageant days had never been fully paid off. They needed me to take on more work. Maybe some commercial gigs between episodes, personal appearances, sponsored social media posts. My Instagram following was substantial. Brands would pay $10,000 per post for product placement. I could do a few posts per week. Easy money. I looked at my brother, gaunt and hollow-eyed, sitting on the couch while our parents discussed monetizing my social media to pay for his survival. I looked at Gran, who'd raised me partially and never asked for anything. I looked at my parents, who'd built their entire adult lives around extracting labor from their child, and I snapped. Not dramatically, not with yelling or tears. Something inside me just broke cleanly, like a bone that's been stressed too long. I told them I was done. I'd finished the season I was contractually obligated to complete, and then I was retiring from acting. I was 16. I wanted to be 16. I wanted to go to school and have friends and live a life that wasn't scheduled in 15-minute increments. I wanted to be a person, not a product. Dad's response was immediate and vicious. If I quit, I'd be destroying our family. Everything we'd built, everything we'd worked for, gone because I was selfish. Did I want Adrian to die? Because without my income, we couldn't afford his treatment. His death would be on my hands. Mom cried and said I was having a breakdown. The pressure of the new show must be too much. Maybe I needed therapy, medication, something to help me see clearly. I was just confused. I'd feel better after a good night's sleep. Adrian surprised everyone by speaking up. His voice was raspy from the overdose, but clear. He told them to leave me alone. He said if I wanted to quit, I should quit. That watching them exploit me for the past decade had been torture. That he'd rather die than watch them use my earnings to keep him alive. Gran backed him up, said she'd survived on Social Security before and could do it again, that she'd get a job if necessary. She was only 68. Plenty of people worked at her age. Mom and Dad looked betrayed, like their own parents and children had conspired against them. The apartment felt too small suddenly, claustrophobic with our shared dysfunction. I finished the season. 4 more months of early call times and late nights. Every day was a countdown to freedom. My parents stopped speaking to me except when necessary. They communicated through icy silence and passive-aggressive comments. Dad stopped attending my shoots. Mom came out of obligation, but sat in my trailer on her phone instead of running lines. The final episode wrapped on a Friday night in November. The cast and crew celebrated with a wrap party at a restaurant in Hollywood. I attended for an hour, smiled for photos, thanked everyone for a great season. Then I went home and slept for 16 hours straight. The next morning, I enrolled in online high school. Real classes with real curriculum, not the bare minimum education I'd been getting on set. I deleted my social media accounts without warning. My agents called, panicking about brand deals and maintaining my platform. I told them I was done and hung up. I started seeing Dr. Reese 3 times per week instead of once. We worked on unpacking a decade of exploitation and parentification and lost autonomy. She helped me understand that what my parents had done wasn't just misguided. It was abusive. They'd used me as an ATM from age 5, prioritized their financial comfort over my well-being, and built a system where I was responsible for everyone's survival. The money situation became critical within 3 months. I'd stopped working, which meant no new income. My residuals came in, but they weren't enough to maintain our lifestyle. Dad got a job in sales that paid $45,000 per year. After a decade of not working, he was furious at having to clock in daily. He blamed me constantly. Mom went back to waitressing. Between their incomes, they could afford a smaller apartment, but not the one we had. They asked me to help with rent, just until they got back on their feet. I said no. I was 17. I'd been financially supporting them since I was 5. I'd earned over $2 million in my lifetime, and I had maybe $100,000 left after taxes and fees and their spending. That money was mine, and I wasn't giving them another cent. The fights were nuclear. Dad called me selfish, ungrateful, heartless. Mom cried and said I was abandoning my family. I reminded them that children aren't supposed to financially support their parents, that they'd stolen my childhood and my earnings and my autonomy, that I owed them nothing. Adrian had gotten into a state-funded residential program. He'd been clean for 4 months and was working on his GED. He called me once a week from the facility, and we'd talk about normal things: books, movies, what he wanted to do after treatment. He was thinking about community college, maybe studying social work. He wanted to help kids like us, kids whose families had failed them. Gran moved in with her sister in Arizona. Before she left, she apologized to me, said she should have done more to protect me, that she'd been complicit in my exploitation by staying silent. I told her I understood. She'd been dependent on my parents too, trapped in the same system. We hugged goodbye, and I felt something release in my chest. Forgiveness, maybe, or just acceptance. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a worse neighborhood. They stopped speaking to me entirely. The silence was a relief. I turned 18 and immediately got a lawyer to review my financial records. California's Coogan law required parents to set aside 15% of a child performer's gross earnings in a blocked trust. I discovered my parents had never established the account. They'd spent everything. Every dollar I'd earned, gone. My lawyer filed a lawsuit. The case was straightforward. My parents had violated state law by failing to establish the required trust. They owed me 15% of my lifetime earnings, plus damages. The amount was substantial, over $300,000, not including interest and legal fees. My parents hired a lawyer who argued they'd spent the money on my career expenses: the coaching, the travel, the headshots, the acting classes. All of that was for my benefit. My lawyer countered with documentation of their personal spending: the lease on a luxury apartment, dinners at expensive restaurants, dad's leased car, mom's shopping habits. None of it qualified as career expenses. The judge ruled in my favor. My parents were ordered to pay restitution of $300,000, plus interest, plus my legal fees. The total came to nearly $400,000. They didn't have it. They'd spent everything and then some. Their credit was destroyed. The judgment would follow them forever, garnishing wages, destroying their financial future. I felt nothing when the verdict was read. Not triumph, not vindication, just emptiness where there should have been family. I moved into a small studio apartment in Pasadena, enrolled in community college studying psychology, got a part-time job at a bookstore that paid $16 per hour. The work was simple and repetitive and beautiful in its normalcy. Nobody recognized me. Nobody cared that I'd been on television. I was just another teenager working retail. Adrian completed his residential program and moved in with me. We split the rent and he got a job in construction. Neither of us was making much money, but it was ours, earned through honest labor, not extracted through exploitation. We'd talk sometimes about our childhood, the pageants, the auditions, the constant pressure. Adrian admitted he'd started using drugs because being high was the only time he felt invisible. When everyone in our family was obsessed with me, drugs made him disappear in a way that felt like relief. I told him about the kissing scene, about the 17 takes while everyone watched, about how I'd felt like my body wasn't my own, just another tool for my parents to monetize. We'd cry sometimes, mourning childhoods we'd never had. Other times we'd laugh at the absurdity of it all. The fact that I'd earned millions while my brother ate pasta every night. That our parents had somehow convinced themselves they were supporting my dreams, when really I'd been supporting their lifestyle. Dr. Reese helped me process the complicated grief of losing your parents while they're still alive. They'd never apologize, never acknowledge the harm they'd caused. In their narrative, they were devoted parents who'd sacrificed everything for my career. The fact that I was the one who'd sacrificed everything didn't register. I ran into my mother once at a grocery store. She looked older, tired. She saw me and froze. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she turned and walked away. Adrian graduated from community college with his AA and transferred to a state university. He wanted to be a social worker specializing in families of child performers, to help parents understand the psychological damage they inflict when they treat their children as income sources, to advocate for stronger protections and enforcement of existing laws. I finished my bachelor's degree in psychology and started working at a nonprofit that helped former child performers transition to normal life. We provided counseling, career guidance, financial planning. The need was staggering. So many kids whose parents had spent everything, who had no education and no life skills, who'd been famous at 10 and forgotten by 20. I testified before the California legislature about strengthening Coogan law protections, about requiring financial literacy education for child performers, about limiting work hours more strictly and enforcing education requirements. Some of my recommendations became law. Small victories, but meaningful. Years passed. Adrian got married to someone he met in his social work program. They had a daughter they named after Gran, who'd passed away quietly in Arizona, surrounded by her sister's family. I stood at Gran's funeral and realized she'd been the only adult who'd tried to protect us, even if her efforts had been insufficient. My parents didn't attend the funeral. I heard through distant relatives that they'd moved to Nevada, still together, still struggling financially. The judgment I'd won followed them, garnishing Dad's wages, preventing them from building any wealth. They'd probably die in debt, consequence of their choices finally catching up. I didn't feel satisfied by their suffering, just sad that they'd never understood what they'd done wrong. At 30, I wrote a memoir. The process was therapeutic and excruciating, reliving every pageant, every audition, every moment of my stolen childhood. The book detailed the financial exploitation, the emotional abuse, the systematic destruction of boundaries. It became a bestseller. Parents of child performers reached out, some defensive, others genuinely concerned they were repeating my parents' mistakes. I did interviews and speaking tours, advocating for reform. Used my platform, finally, for something that mattered. The money from the book went into a trust for Adrian's daughter. She'd never have to work to support her family. She'd get to be a child. One afternoon, I received a letter from my mother. No return address, just my name on the envelope in her handwriting. Inside was a single page. She wrote that she'd seen my book, that she wanted me to know their side of the story. They'd only wanted the best for me. Every decision had been made with love. They'd sacrificed their careers, their time, their energy to support my dreams. If I couldn't see that, then I'd been brainwashed by therapists and lawyers who wanted to destroy families. I read the letter twice, then burned it in my sink. There was no point in responding. She'd never understand that children don't dream of working 60-hour weeks. That love doesn't look like exploitation. That sacrifice means giving up something for someone else's benefit, not profiting from their labor. Adrian and I hosted holidays at my apartment. Small gatherings with his wife, their daughter, a few close friends. We built traditions that had nothing to do with performance or money, just presence and authenticity and chosen family. His daughter was 4 when she asked why she didn't have grandparents like other kids. Adrian looked at me, and I nodded. He told her simply that sometimes adults make choices that hurt their children, and when that happens, the children have to protect themselves by staying away. That family is about love and safety, not just biology. She seemed to accept this, returning to her coloring book without further questions. I wondered if she'd understand fully when she was older, if she'd judge us for cutting off her grandparents. But I hoped we'd raise her with enough emotional intelligence to recognize that sometimes the healthiest choice is distance. Sometimes survival requires walking away from people who should have protected you, but chose to exploit you instead. I never went back to acting. The thought of performing, of being watched and evaluated and directed, made my skin crawl. I'd had enough of that for several lifetimes. Instead, I built a quiet life filled with meaningful work and genuine relationships. I helped other survivors reclaim their autonomy and their narratives. I testified against parents who'd violated their children's rights. I fought for systemic change that might protect the next generation of child performers from what I'd endured. The pageant circuit still exists. I see videos sometimes of 5-year-olds in elaborate makeup, doing complex routines for judges and crowds. Their parents stand behind cameras, timing smiles, adjusting costumes. I wonder which of those children actually wants to be there and which are living out their parents' ambitions and financial needs. I can't save them all. Can't reach through screens and offer escape to every exploited child performer. But I save some. Through legislation, through advocacy, through the nonprofit work. I save some, and I teach them that their value isn't tied to their earning potential. That they deserve childhoods. That what was done to them was wrong, even if it was legal. Even if their parents insisted it was love. Adrian and I still talk about forgiveness sometimes. Whether we should reach out to our parents, offer reconciliation. Dr. Reese says, forgiveness is personal, that we don't owe it to anyone. Some wounds don't heal through reunion. Some relationships aren't worth salvaging. I think about the little girl I was at 5, standing on a stage in an uncomfortable dress, smiling a smile that made my face hurt. I think about how that girl disappeared, replaced by a product, a brand, an income source. I grieve for her, for the childhood she never had, for the choices she never got to make. But I also celebrate the woman she became, someone who broke the cycle, who refused to accept exploitation as love, who built a life on her own terms. That's the victory. Not the lawsuit or the book or the legislative changes, though those matter. The victory is living authentically, free from performing, free from the constant pressure to be profitable. The victory is Adrian's daughter growing up knowing she's valuable because she exists, not because she can earn. The victory is looking in the mirror and recognizing the person staring back, instead of seeing a stranger who's been performing so long she forgot her real face. My family made me their income source from the moment I turned 5, but I stopped being their cash machine at 17. The years after were harder in some ways, easier in others, but they were mine. Finally, completely mine. And that made all the difference. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.